ピーターさんです。
Hi. We are still in a minority position. The other parties basically all the time call us radicals, right-wing radicals, which is just wrong. And they try to keep us from every power position. It's a world that is steered centrally by a sort of unofficial world government. And they want to interfere in our lives, in everything we do, in our finances.
ところで国際弁護士のライナー・フュルミッヒさんのことなんですが、
まだ刑務所にいるんですかね。
長期間ね、独房に入れられていたわけですよね。でこれはものすごい驚きで、彼はドイツの民主主義が彼の事件は死んでいるということの証明 のような気がするんですよ。
Yes, that too. He's not the only one, I must say. We have several victims. One of the organizers of the mass protests in 2020, Michael Ballbeck, also was incarcerated for 9 months, basically for doing nothing wrong, nothing. And he was now, 5 years later, just a few weeks ago, he got no conviction. Still, they locked him away for 9 months. And Rainer Föhmich also is behind bars. It's a different story, but he still is behind bars. We have judges that did not convict doctors that did not want to give nation. They too were taken away their license to be a judge. It is all so much to investigate, and we're working on that investigation as a party because if we do not really see into that properly and really tell the truth and find the truth out forensically, then there is a danger that these things repeat and that we will have a similar situation again, which nobody can want. They should not get away with that scandal.
そうですね。我々番組で彼にインタビューしたんですよ。
I see. From the prison or?
以前ね、私の姉、ベルリンに住んでる姉を通じてなんですけど、彼の名前が世界中で話題になっていた頃ですね、ちょうど。で、コロナは大きないわゆる詐欺だと、言っていた頃ですね。で、逮捕されたのはその後間もなくだったと思います。
Yes.
彼をね、解放するために何か党としてやってるんでしょうか。例えば接触を試みたりとかそういうことです。
I know that one or two colleagues of mine are on that case. I tried to support Michael Ballbeck, and finally he's out now. He too was a very large victim. We have a few others. So Rainer Föhmich is not the only one. The story is a little bit different. I'm not an expert here. There are so many victims, but yes, I think it's honorable that you interviewed him and you tried to help him.
ありがとうございます。もうね、彼は独房にはいないということだと思うんですけどね。ところで私たちのミュージックビデオを新しくリリースしたものもご覧になっていただけましたでしょうか。
I saw one, but I think you dうseveral pieces, and actually it's very nice and beautiful music, so congratulations to that.
ありがとうございます。
嬉しいですね。もう一点ね、私はカウンセリングというのをやる立場なんですけど、一般的に言って日本人が抱える最大の問題の一つは健全な自尊心の欠如だということも以前から言ってるんですよ。で、学校ではなぜかというと、学校では日本のルーツについて学ぶ機会がないからなんですね。で、そのために日本人はね、自分のルーツを知らないんですよ。さらに戦後ですよね、戦争敗戦の後に GHQ によって日本は7年半ぐらい、6年半、7年にわたる政策で占領されたんですよね。で、その占領政策終わった後に占領政策中に GHQ が歴史を書き換えちゃって、で戦前の時代は基本的に否定したわけなんですよね。ですからね、教育とか歴史の授業でとかあらゆるものが変えられてしまったんですよ。で、一般的にね、日本人が日本人であることが嫌いだという自尊心が低い理由の一つは、自分自身を否定しなければならないということがあるからなんですよね、悪い意味でね。で、ドイツも同じ敗戦国でヒトラーを否定して、つまり核を否定するという点では同じようなことが起きたと思うんですよ。でも僕から見ると、自尊心に関して言うと、ドイツ人の方が日本人と比べてより健全な自尊心を持っているように見えるんですけど、それはなぜだと思いますか？
That's a few questions, but it's very interesting questions. And I come to the psychological part of your question too, but let me begin with history, because there really are similarities before and after 1945, because obviously we were both defeated nations in 1945, and this, I believe, is not by accident. It was brought about, especially by the Americans, and you mentioned General MacArthur. We too had American influence, and there was an official, almost an official policy immediately after 1945 that Germany had to be re-educated officially in order that Hitler never could be repeated, which was a goal which I would support. But they overdid completely, and they never ever stopped that re-education of Germans and Germany. It was strong in the 1940s and 50s, immediately after the war. But to this very date, until today, sometimes we say that Hitler was never opposed so heavily than currently, 80 years after after his death. So it's really ridiculous, and it's a tragedy that German history, and I think it's the same for Japan, is restricted in the official history books to those in Germany. It's 13 years between 1933 and 1945 when Hitler was in power. And I believe in Japan it's similar. Your history is probably restricted to, I don't know, 5 years from 1940 to 1945. And that is just, well, chronological rubbish, because the German culture is 2,000, some say even 3,000 years old, and Japan is, I think, even older. So we have an incredibly long history with ups and downs, and I think both our nations or ethnicities committed crimes over those thousands of years, as all other countries did as well. There's no exception. There is no such thing as a good country, as a perfect country which never did any evil. The Americans too, even though they only have a 250-year-old history, have started so many wars to this very date. They cannot claim that they are morally perfect. So every nation has its ups and downs, but it is not fair to restrict Japan to 1940 to 1945, and it is not fair to restrict the German history to 1933 to 45. But that's exactly what is in our history books. Almost everything is restricted to those years. And yes, I would go along with your statement that self-esteem in Japan, but in Germany too. Here I have to oppose to you a little bit. Has been harmed by that. The Germans were not very self-estimate persons. I don't know about the perception in Japan. Maybe it's your very polite culture and your very low and not low, but quiet culture and your polite culture, which makes our behavior a bit louder, and maybe it looks like more having more self-esteem, but I wouldn't subscribe to that. I think the mass psychological effects of the re-education was horrible, and yes, I believe that it is not good for a nation to cut all the all the links to their past and to their ancestors, the positive links in Japan before 1940, before 1930, and in Germany same. We have had centuries of good times. We contributed so much to the world, and that too should not be forgotten. It is not fair to restrict our nations and our societies to those 5 unfortunate years during World War II. Yes, we have quite a few things in common here, and it's not by accident. The Allies did bring that about deliberately. In hindsight, I must say, they wanted to bring us down, and that is almost official on record. The Germans already since the late 1900s were about to overtake Britain as the world power, the foremost world power. And that is one of the reasons why, since around 1890, Germany was already seen as an enemy in the Anglo-Saxon world. I don't know exactly about Japan, because your big time obviously was in the 1980s, when your stock market was very high and you were about to overtake the US as the supreme economic power. I don't know exactly what happened in the late 1980s when your stock market crashed and when you went into that big depression, which didn't end to this very day, I must say. But that too had something to do with international Anglo-Saxon financial markets. I think I can say that, even though I'm not an expert in Japanese economy. But I used to invest in the Japanese stock market, and I've been following that since the early 1990s, when Japan was standing completely different than today. Kumiko, before you came in, I discussed your interest rates and your indebtedness with Murray, and you will have interesting times ahead of you, because that debt is not sustainable. You're at 250% of GDP.
なるほど。
非常に興味深い深いですねこれね。でもう一回自尊心についてなんですけど、自分がどのような存在だとドイツ人というのは考えてるんでしょうかね。ドイツ人にとって最も健全な自尊心というのはどういうものなんでしょうか。つまり本当のねドイツ人というのはどういう存在なのかという点について聞きたいんですね。かつてローマ帝国の一部であった時代がありますよね。であなたの政党ピーターさんの政党は EU に反対してるわけですよ。で EU というのはまさにローマ帝国の復活版ですよね。だからでローマ帝国というのはパリに、ね、ドイツにこう移動してたわけです、中心がね。だから EU はローマ帝国の復活なんだけども、ローマ帝国の一員であったドイツがそのローマ帝国に反対しているというような図式にも見える。でこれですよね。でローマ帝国としての重要な役割も担ってるわけですからね。で長い歴史について見れば、その長い歴史の中ではローマ帝国だった時代もあるということですよ。だからローマ帝国の一員ですよね。ご自身をどのように考えていらっしゃいますか、捉えていらっしゃいますか。
Well, I can't completely confirm what you've just said, because the German population and nor the government nor my party really defines ourselves on any Roman Empire roots. Historically, 2000 years ago, only half of Germany was conquered by the Roman Empire. That was only the southern part. They were enemies of the initial Germanic tribes that inhabited ancient Germany, which was not founded at the time. And we threw the Romans out, actually, with many wars behind and the Rhine River and to the south of the Alps. So we do not exactly define ourselves. Later on in you're right that in the medieval times, we had a lot of connections with Rome and Italy, because the popes, some in Rome, very often were German popes. And yes, we do define ourselves a little bit Romanic, if you want it that way, but it's not the overwhelming feeling. And we do not see ourselves as the the sons of the Roman Caesars. That's just not correct. So I don't believe that the Germans used to define themselves on the nation state, which was only founded in 1871 in Germany as the German Empire, which became very powerful very quickly after 1870, as I just said, in the 1890s, and we were still powerful in the first half of the 20th century. But then came Hitler and everything was spoiled. So people became materialistic after World War II, I must say. They did not become spiritual. They did not become most of them were not fundamental Christians too. Unfortunately, we defined ourselves based on consume and money for many decades. That is changing now, but it was part of the problem because a materialistic society lacks spirituality and lacks something to believe in. It was not nationalism any longer after World War II, and there was no spirituality replacing it. So maybe we are still looking for something personally, but that's my personal opinion. I define myself very rationally. I believe in the rational decisions, in logic, but you can argue that many people, and even most people, need something spiritual to believe in. That is not my personal personality, but it is probably the majority of people all over the world. That is true in every society, I think.
非常に興味深い話ですね。今日は本当お時間をいただきありがとうございました。
本当にありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, and I think it was a very interesting discussion. Maybe we can have a follow-up in a few months or in a few years. It's very possible that we will be the ruling party 4 or 5 years from now, but unfortunately Germany will look even more different than it has already changed. But I would appreciate to keep in touch.
ぜひお願いいたします。
ぜひぜひ。
I hope that we could contribute something to your edutainment platform. I understand that your audience is not a political audience, but these days everybody has to be, even though they probably tune in for your music, which is wonderful.
ありがとうございます。ところで日本に来たことはありますか？
No, unfortunately not, but I'm looking forward to coming one.
ぜひお越しください。
キックバックカフェっていうのやってますんで、ぜひ来てください。
Be careful. I would probably take an invitation.
いつでもお待ちしております。今回お時間いただき本当にありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。
Have a good evening. All the best.
党員の皆さんと関係者の皆さん全員によろしくお伝えください。
I will, including to our party chiefs. I'm the vice chairman of the party, but I will pass it on to Alice Weidel and Tino Kruppal.
ドイツでも大躍進中の野党第一党 AfD 副党首のピーター・ベーリンガーさんでした。盛大な拍手お願いします。